A matter of considerable importance. A Safe Haven Orphanage Mystery by Patricia Asedegbega. For my godchildren, Chinenye, Kachi, and Nick. And for Henry, who was ever so helpful. Episode 1. Nicholas placed his backpack carefully inside his desk, making sure he fastened the metal lid. It did not have a padlock, but then he did not envision any danger, as everyone knew that he had nothing inside worth stealing. The feeling of excitement grew as he waited for Kachi, his best friend, to arrive. He would probably do so just before the bell rang to signal for the students to walk towards the assembly ground. His friend's father was one of those people who enjoyed living on the edge, especially when it had to do with punctuality. So making his son run to class every morning was a way of building character, and as he repeated to him often, he would thank him one day. Kachi often said in frustration that so far he was feeling everything but gratitude. Nick! 7 minutes early. This is a record for me. The words of his chubby, beaming friend as he carelessly threw his things into the desk behind his brought Nick out of his thoughts. It is? Your dad left home earlier? Nicholas asked the boy in surprise. This had never happened in the 4 years that they had been friends. My elder brother changed the time on all the wall clocks in the house. They were all set 10 minutes later than the actual time, so breakfast was served and eaten in a hurry, and we managed to leave the house a few minutes earlier, Kachi laughed. And Nicholas thought about how his friend's father was going to shout when he discovered the deceit. If there were 2 things he knew about the taxi driver, it was that punctuality was not his strong suit, and that he shouted a lot. Really a lot. The man could shout in Lagos and wake a sleeping elephant in Kenya. He's going to shout when he finds out, he said to his still grinning friend. Yes. But all the brothers made a pact. We're going to act like we have no idea what he's talking about. Richie got into trouble yesterday, he's a senior prefect in his school. Well, he was asked by a teacher to prepare something before the morning assembly, and the woman didn't want to listen to his excuses when he failed to do what she'd asked, all thanks to my father. So, my 2 brothers and I held a council of war yesterday, weighing out all the possibilities regarding punishments for our actions, and we decided to go ahead and assume the risks. Nicholas nodded at the wisdom behind their thoughtfully mapped-out plan. He hoped their deception would not be discovered before the end of the year examinations coming up 2 weeks later. Suddenly remembering what had him so excited that morning, he grinned and unzipped his backpack. Look what I have. Wow! You got it? How? Kachi took the new math set and pack of rulers from him and studied them appreciatively. The bell ringing interrupted both boys, and Nick tossed them back into his bag as everyone rushed out. Mrs. Balogun was in charge of the morning assembly that week, and she did not take kindly to latecomers or interruptions, dishing out punishments to the offenders that far exceeded their crime. The next bell that rang a few hours later was the very welcome sound that announced break time, leaving Mrs. Akanta barely able to finish her last sentence, as the teenagers had stopped listening and were sending furtive glances at the 2 classroom doors, itching for their freedom. Kachi and Nicholas rushed out. They were set to play a football match with the boys in the year ahead of them. There was a fierce competition between both teams, and as expected, a plentiful audience witnessed the match, which they sadly lost 12-9. On the way back to class, a few of them lamented their fate, blaming everyone and everything minus themselves for the loss. Finally, the much-awaited last class of the day arrived, and Mr. Wale walked in, reaching the front of the class with his accustomed long strides. They all got up respectfully to return his greeting, getting an order in response that they be seated. The sounds of desks being opened and boards placed on them were heard across the room as Nicholas opened his backpack, happy that from that occasion onward, he would not have to wait for Kachi to finish with his protractor or a particular ruler and hand it over to him to conclude whichever task the teacher had set for them. Unlike Nicholas, who loved technical drawing, Kachi only chose it because his father had insisted that no son of mine is going to choose agricultural science over technical drawing, not if he expects me to continue paying his school fees. With those words, his fate had been sealed, but he always took his sweet time finishing his work. Most of the time, Nicholas had to give him directives to hurry him up so he could get to use his friend's stuff, who was more than satisfied with getting average scores, as his hope was that once his father saw his grades, he would not once again force the subject on him the following year. Nicholas let out a gasp that got the attention of the surrounding desks. Peter, the boy on his left, looked at him inquiringly. "My new materials are gone. I had them here this morning." "You saw them, Kachi," Nicholas wailed. His friend got up to help him look for them, and they emptied the contents of his backpack. Mr. Wale approached them to see what the noise interrupting his class was all about, and Nicholas, almost in tears, explained. "Are you sure you didn't leave it at home?" the man asked, rummaging through the belongings himself, as Nicholas held his breath, hoping they would magically materialize. "He did not, sir. I saw them this morning myself," his friend replied, seeing that the boy in question seemed to be in a state of shock and at a loss for words. Mr. Wale, not being what one could describe as a patient man, would probably direct one of his withering looks at him soon if an answer to his question was not given. "Was your name written on the different components of the set? Is there any form of identification?" the teacher asked. "Yes, sir. My name was written on some cream-colored adhesive paper tape on the rulers," Nicholas replied, recovering his voice and glad that he had at least done that. "Right. Everyone, open your desk. Nicholas's drawing materials are missing. I hope not to find them in your possession, or else." He directed a stern look at the students for good measure, and with the help of Viano, the class prefect, he conducted the search. Various items were confiscated, but nobody seemed to have Nick's things amongst their belongings. What is Uche going to say? The unhappy thought kept popping up in Nicholas's mind as he looked around the class wildly, wondering who had his stuff. Only those who took technical drawing were present. Their other classmates had opted for either agricultural science or home economics. But of course, the theft must have occurred earlier on, and the only time interval when his desk had been left unattended was break time. Suddenly, he thought of the one classmate who preferred remaining in class to going out with the rest, Chinyeye. He needed to speak to her. She must have seen who had taken his prized possessions, and he desperately needed to get them back. That afternoon, the boy dragged his feet throughout the walk home. He was not at all in a hurry to get there, and had stayed back and offered to help Frank to sweep the classroom in his place. The boy had not needed to be asked twice and had gleefully handed the broom to him before remembering his loss and making an attempt at containing his joy, as Nicholas's countenance reflected his consternation and sorrow at what had occurred. "I heard about what happened during TD. Peter told me when I got back from my agri class. I didn't see you show it this morning, as you know Peter and I always get early to the assembly ground, and today was no different. I do hope it turns up." Frank had quickly disappeared after giving Nick a pat of solidarity on the shoulder, probably not wanting to stick around in case the offer to sweep the classroom was revoked. Nicholas had looked around the room as he crossed both boys off his list. It was a known fact that Peter and Frank liked leading the line going back to class after the assembly. Nobody dared take those two places, except in the case of absence for illness. He had worked for nothing, as he had not found any trace of his stuff in the classroom. To make matters worse, he had missed Chinenye and had not been able to question her. No, it had not been a good day at all, and he was in no hurry to get home. Especially because, knowing how much he had wanted to have his own set of tools, Uche would surely ask how the class had gone. What would he reply to that question? He stood looking at the building he lived in. It had gone past needing a few coats of paint. It was almost in the tear down and build a new one phase. For him and the 13 other children who lived there, it was home, but to the outside world, it was just an orphanage. Some were happy it existed, while others had plenty to say about it every opportunity they got. Being in a good neighborhood, they did not want such an establishment near their houses, claiming that it devalued the area and often complaining about having to share their vital space with people like them. Whenever he heard those words, Nicholas would wonder exactly what they thought went on in their home to speak of it in such a way. The inhabitants of the orphanage all came from very different backgrounds. A good number of them unknown, but they were the only family they knew and treated each other as such. Hurry up, Nick. You know that it's your turn to set the table. Why are you so late today? His sister Ada walked past him in her uniform, not waiting for his answer. He hoped Uche was not yet home from the mechanic workshop where he worked. The plan was to keep well out of his way all evening and get back to school the next day as early as possible and search again. Perhaps, in his nervous state, he had missed finding a vital clue. 15-year-old Jane was the cook for the week. The adoptive mother, whom no one in that house considered to be anything other than their real mother, had divided the house chores, and except the youngest, 3-year-old Xavier, they all had home assignments that were age-appropriate. 14-year-old Nicholas had reached an age at which he was conscious of what went on in the house. To be fair, the inhabitants of the house were all exposed to an early awareness of life. As much as Gloria Olotu tried to shelter the children in the small orphanage she had opened 20-odd years earlier, when she had become a widow, their reality was something impossible to hide from them. They were always struggling to make ends meet, rarely being able to make 3 meals a day, except for the younger ones. The older ones made sure the smaller children never went to bed hungry. Because he was aware of their ever precarious economic situation, Nicholas had not asked for the geometry sets that he had really needed. A parishioner at church had given him his old drawing board and a compass that Uche had tried to fix, as it was loose and swung in every possible direction, but he had continued using Kachi's in class. He had been dreading the fast approaching final examination, but had not dared to speak up and put more stress on the only woman who had been a mother to him, as he had no idea who his biological parents were or why he had been abandoned. The power supply had been cut the previous week, as the bill had not been paid, and the 2 eldest boys, Uche and Chidi, were working extra hours to gather the money. In the meantime, the house woke up in darkness and went to sleep in darkness. There was no cold water in the fridge, and the old and noisy standing fans could not provide air in the very hot nights either, which were practically the only 2 luxuries they all enjoyed whenever there was power. So, when Uche had come in one night, just before Nick had gone to bed, and presented him with the drawing set, the teenager had been unable to stop his eyes from getting moist. How was he supposed to tell him, knowing the problems and needs of the household, that on the first day he had taken it out of the house, His precious geometry set was missing. True, it was not like those of some of his classmates, but it had been his, not inherited like most of his things, but brand new and all his to use in a subject he really liked and that would be of use to him in the future. The few hours it had been in his possession, he had studied every inch of the components of the set, down to the black circle of ink in one of the rulers. Some would consider it a defect. He had thought it made it different, special even. Its existence had probably given Uche a bargaining edge during its purchase. Lunch had been a somber affair for him. A plate of rice with one piece of tin mackerel in tomato sauce that tasted like cardboard. And he had not even minded when one brother or sister, he could not be sure which, had pinched part of his tiny piece of fish. "What is wrong with you?" Henry asked. Henry was a 12-year-old boy who had come into the orphanage 2 years after him and had become his confidant. Nobody in that house called him by his name, except Nicholas. "The drawing set was stolen from my desk today," he whispered, quiet enough so the 2 other boys playing a game of cards on one of the 3 bunk beds the room contained did not hear what he had just revealed. "No! How did you manage that?" Henry, always ready to exaggerate any situation, asked in a raised voice. That was his trademark, magnifying the tiniest affair and making sure everyone became aware of it. "Shout louder. They haven't heard you in Abuja yet." "I don't know. I only went out for break and it was gone when I needed it later on for my class. The desks were searched and my things were nowhere to be found." "Did you scratch your name on it like I told you?" Henry inquired. He shook his head. He had been unable to write his name on the rulers using the tip of the compass, as he did not want to spoil them. Instead, he had written it on the tape, and the black smudge on the biggest triangle-shaped ruler was an excellent proof of identification, but he had not seen it among any of the sets that the teacher had held up to him. "Had you listened to me, you would have caught the person red-handed. Now all you've achieved is gifting someone with a new drawing set." Henry shook his head wisely. Nicholas thought that his sibling was being anything but helpful, but he needed not have worried about having to explain what had happened, because half an hour after their tired mother arrived from spending the best part of the day in her little convenience shop, they heard her voice, and it was not a happy voice. "Small but mighty." They all followed Henry to the living room where she was sitting down, his backpack open and a notebook in her hands. A tired-looking Chidi was sitting by her side. Uche had probably not returned, Nick thought with some relief, as their mother looked at the 11 children of various ages who had followed the boy in trouble into the room. Henry, of the small but mighty alias, stood before her with an innocent look on his face. Anyone who did not know him would wrongly assume that he hadn't an inkling on the events about to unfold. Judging by the narrowed eyes their mother was looking at him with, it was clear that she was not fooled. "Raise your hand if you answer to the nickname Small but Mighty," the woman asked the captive audience, and after a moment, the owner of the name raised his hand. "I didn't call the rest of you, so before I open my eyes again, every other person had better be anywhere else but in this room." She closed her eyes, and the children scrambled, all except Xavier, of course, who remained in the room as he hardly ever separated himself from their mother and did not feel that the order was directed at him. They did not go very far, though, just to the other side of the door. There was no way that they were going to miss what was about to happen. It just wouldn't be the same thing to hear an abridged summary later on. "Can you explain this note? And don't you dare take it from me and pretend to read it like you're seeing it for the first time," she warned. In the silence that followed, it was understood that it had been the boy's plan to gain time with that tactic. "It's from my teacher, Ma," was the reply he gave. The woman continued interrogating the lad. "I can see that. Can you explain why this is the third note I'm getting in 2 weeks? Correction, not getting. I've had to find it by myself. Very well hidden in your bag, between the pages of a notebook. Why is your teacher asking that I see her as soon as possible? I was involved in a fight with a boy. His shirt got torn, and the teacher wrote both of us a note. But he started it. He pushed me first," Small but Mighty defended himself, his voice packed with emotion. "Another fight? Why? Why did you fight this time? And you say his shirt got torn. That's your way of explaining that you tore it, which means that I'll be made to pay for it." "Ha!" Small but Mighty. The children on the other side of the door heard a clap, and most could visualize the woman clapping her hands and shaking her head in dismay. "He said I was worthless, and that was why I live in an orphanage," was the angry reply the boy gave by way of the explanation that was being required from him. Even from beyond the door, the anger was felt by all and understood. Although their origin was kept a secret, in their various schools, someone would eventually find out, and the class bully normally used the information to his or her advantage. Their mother spoke after a pause. "In this house, nobody calls you Henry. Everyone calls you Small but Mighty. Do you know why this is?" the woman asked. There was no reply from the boy she was addressing, who wisely understood that it was a rhetorical question. "It is because you are not afraid of anything. You are the smallest boy in your class, but you've made sure that your size is not a tool any bully can use against you. You have the courage of a lion, but let me tell you something. A lion knows when to stay and fight, but most importantly, when to size up a situation and walk away. All of you, come in. I know you're listening outside the door. People who ask me how I can survive without a TV set haven't met my ever so thoughtful family, who make sure to provide me with a daily dose of entertainment." They obeyed her call and stood behind their brother. "I have said this before many times, and I will not get tired of doing so. There will always be children who think they are better than you, either because they are not in an orphanage, because of the school they go to, the part of town they live in, the car their father drives, the clothes they wear. The list is endless. And even if they have no reasons to look down on you, they will invent them. But the fact that they think that way does not make it true. What have I told you all to say every morning in front of the mirror? I am fearfully and wonderfully made," they all shouted in unison, Small but Mighty included. "Exactly. You are all unique and special. And if someone can't see it, you walk away. You never, ever bring yourself down to their level. Some people feel the need to punish others when they're unhappy, but it will not be any of you that they use to feel better about themselves. Have I made myself clear?" she asked, holding her left ear for effect, her eyes on every single one of them. "Yes," they all shouted. "Now, you must be feeling very lucky that I can't afford to give you pocket money, so I can't take that away from you to pay for what you did. But for allowing the shirt of a classmate to accidentally fall into your hands and get torn again, accidentally, you will spend 1 week on washing up duties." "Ah, Mama, it's not fair. It's not my week." Nicholas tried really hard to suppress a chuckle. If there was one thing Henry hated, it was doing the washing up. He was always striking deals with his brothers to avoid that chore. "I am a bit confused here. Do you think this matter is open for discussion?" the woman asked. "No, Ma." Even Small but Mighty knew that he could not negotiate with their mother, or he could end up with 2 weeks of doing the dishes. And since it was a punishment, she would make sure that he did every single bit of it. Nicholas went back to his room, consoling his brother who, once out of earshot, was complaining about how unfair his fate had been and the world in general. Momentarily, the drawing set was forgotten. Who do you think took it? Kachi asked Nicholas the next day as they stood before the class surveying their classmates. It has to be someone in our class. Someone must have seen it when you took it out and showed it to me. I remember almost everyone was in, as it was just moments before the bell rang. I've given it a lot of thought. My suspects are Andrew. Remember he lost his set of rulers last week, and I noticed that he had one during the search. And also Abiodun. He just enjoys being mean to me for no apparent reason. You? Nicholas asked. Yes, I too thought of Abiodun. It's the sort of thing he'd do just for the fun of it, Kachi replied. Also, Charlie. He did take my pencil that time and denied he had it, till I showed him the mark I'd made on it. Then he chalked it all up to an unfortunate mistake. I, of course, didn't believe him. The memory still didn't make him laugh, despite the culprit's cheeky assurance that it would do soon. They both studied their 3 suspects who were chatting with their group of friends before class. I'm guessing there's no hope for getting a new one, Kachi asked. He was the only friend from class who had visited Nicholas at home and knew his whole story, so understood better than anyone how much effort getting it must have cost. No, I can't even bring myself to admit what happened. Uche is working more to help pay the bills, and he came home really late last night. We owe money to the clinic still. Bauer was hospitalized 2 weeks ago, and they treated him and allowed us to take him home, solely on the condition that we agreed to a payment plan. How can I tell him what happened? No. We have to discover who took my stuff and recover it. Nicholas shook his head, the image of the possible conversation with his brother terrifying him. Well, we have to do something about it quickly before the exams, Kachi affirmed, his young face full of wisdom. Remember that we won't be allowed to talk or exchange materials, so I won't be able to share my stuff with you. I think we should also ask friends if they have any extra to lend you. I suspect whoever stole them has erased any trace of his actions. Nicholas looked around him, and suddenly his gaze fell upon Chineye. He was just about to go to her when the bell rang for them to go to the assembly ground. The classes went by really slowly for him that morning. He would not have been able to repeat anything from the lessons if asked to do so afterwards. All he could think about was his investigation and the questions he could ask their suspects to throw them off guard and get them to confess. Nobody was that clever, and mistakes were bound to be made. The bell for break time rang, and as expected, all the students were out of sight within a minute. Nothing could keep them in their prison a second longer than necessary. Come on, let's go and buy a meat pie to share, Kachi offered. He did that often, whenever his father gave him some money to buy himself something to eat in the school canteen. You go. I'm going to start my investigations, Nicholas replied, as he walked to the back of the class, near the large windows through which one could see the football field. There was an ongoing match that day that he was not playing in, but had it not been for the loss of his beloved drawing set, he would have been there to cheer them on, or shout when a wrong move was played. The curiosity was too much for his friend, who abandoned the initial plan of going to buy a snack and followed close behind, eager to be part of whatever was about to happen. Hello, Chineye, Nicholas greeted the tall girl, who, as usual, had her braided head buried in a book. It seemed like she had not heard them, so he repeated his greeting before she looked up at them. It was not a look of one interested in knowing why she had been interrupted. But Nicholas did not let this deter him from his mission. You never go out at break time, and as you know, my stuff was stolen yesterday. It had to be done during that short space of time, so you must have seen the person that took it. He watched her expressionless face, hoping for an answer, one that was instead quickly volunteered by Kachi. Oh, you are the thief, his friend almost shouted his accusation, a triumphant look on his face. Nick looked from one to the other, having not considered the possibility. But would it be so far-fetched? After all, no one knew much about her. She had transferred to the school the previous term and had not made any friends, or none that he could remember seeing her with. What if she had been expelled from her former school for theft? That would be privileged information that the school would not have shared with them. They both looked at the girl, waiting for a reaction from her that would prove their suspicions right. Nicholas had not had a chance to study her closely before. Her skin was the color of chocolate, and her big eyes were staring at them in a way that could not be described as friendly. Nicholas thought that she, like him, probably came from a humble home, as he noticed that there was a patched bit in the blouse of her uniform. It seems the intelligence gene skipped one generation in both of your family trees, Chineye replied. How can you conduct an investigation by walking up to a suspect and asking her directly if she's the culprit? What answer do you expect to get? Yes, I did it. You caught me. Nicholas understood why she had not made any friends yet if she answered questions with insults. But then, Kachi had basically called her a thief to her face. From the response his friend gave, it was clear that he was not about to consider his own slight, but was furious with the implication of his lack of intelligence. It's you, your whole family, your future family, that Kachi uttered angrily, and Nicholas decided to intervene before things got ugly. There's no need to get defensive. We only asked a question. As you have nothing to hide, I'm sure you won't mind giving us an answer, he said in a placating manner. The girl looked at the books she had reluctantly put down, as if considering whether continuing the conversation with them was worth it or not. It looks like you two need a lot of help, and it will be an opportunity to put my detective skills to good use. So I'll give you a few pointers. But then, you need to be on your way, because I really need to finish this chapter before the bell rings. Nicholas mentally shook his head. Replying was not worth it. However, silence was not one of Kachi's virtues, especially after being dismissed by the hand wave that the girl had used to accompany her words. Nick, be careful. Like she said, the thief won't willingly admit his crime. But who had the best opportunity? Who needs a new set of rulers? You're looking at her, he turned to Chineye. I happen to have been privileged to see your rulers fall to the ground the other day, and Deji stepped on them. From where I was standing, I saw that at least one of them broke into pieces. I am sure he still hasn't forgotten what you yelled at him and how you grabbed him and demanded he pay for them. The boy had a look of satisfaction on his face, and Nicholas would have enjoyed the moment had he not been so worried, thinking that the clock was ticking and that with each passing minute, the possibility of recovering his set was slipping away. The girl opened her desk, rummaged in her bag, and brought out a plastic package containing her rulers, including a triangle-shaped one, and with the same type of smile that was fast disappearing from Kachi's face, showed it to Nicholas, who sighed audibly. Mine were JP, yours are marble. What can you tell us? Did you see anything or not? The boy asked in frustration. Ordinarily, I would have been your best bet. But yesterday, I actually left the classroom for about 10 minutes. It was the only one day my aunt didn't give me any snacks, so I had to go and buy something to eat. And before your annoying friend asks for proof, you can ask Mrs. Alabi. She stopped me on the way to the canteen and gave me money to buy her a piece of cake and something to drink. I was away for a little over 10 minutes. When I got back, there was no one in the classroom, and people started coming back about 5 minutes later, just before the bell rang. I didn't see anyone go near your desk. You were the only person that opened it when you put your sports clothes in your bag. How do you know that? Kachi asked. You must have been reading. Your head's always buried in a book. Oh, I notice everything. It's impossible to concentrate when you all come in, charging like elephants. When that happens, I don't waste any more time reading and concentrate instead on what happens around me. I assure you, nothing gets past me. Let me give you 2 examples. Last Tuesday, Deborah either lost or forgot her eraser, and I saw her walk around the class and then pinch Patrick's. She then walked over to her desk and cut it in half, tossing one half out the window. She then proceeded to make the remaining half look older by tossing it on the floor and moving it around, and also drawing on it with her pen. By the time poor Patrick went by looking for his eraser, he saw it but didn't recognize it. I had to take off my hat to her, and I would put such an interesting character at the top of your suspect list. Now, this morning, I saw someone pinch another person's lunch money. Kachi, you were on the way to the canteen, right? What were you going to pay with? You should thank me for saving you from such a tremendous embarrassment. The look on the girl's face could only be described as intense satisfaction. To stay up to date with Patricia Asedegbega's work, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.